Hi, my name is Karol, and I'm part of GS Warsaw Model Risk Management. And we come to this webinar with a presentation, what can go wrong with models. So I'm part of a relatively small team in Goldman Sachs Warsaw that takes care of model risk and manages model risk for the firm. And today I wanted to give you a brief introduction about what model risk is, and also kind of career opportunities that you can have in that direction. So, but first of all, let me maybe introduce a bit what Goldman Sachs is, right? So Goldman Sachs is one of the major investment banks, headquartered in New York, but have a worldwide business across the world in main financial centers. And we are basically our main goal is to serve our clients with any services that they would require. So this is the business model is quite complicated in terms of the number of services we can offer, but the core thing here is to provide the and help out our clients, and this would be mostly institutional clients until fairly recently. So what kind of products that Goldman Sachs would construct or offer? This is really related to client goals. For example, if you are a company that wants to go to initial public offering, or create an IPO, for example, and you need to be advised on that, Goldman Sachs offers those type of services, and we have done quite many IPOs of really large firms like Twitter, for example. However, this is like investment banking part of the business. On the other side, there are global markets where we try to support markets, also market make, and provide any type of financial services companies or other partners will require, either advice or take part in the transactions as well. And kind of a third service we offer to our clients is really wealth management and research. So we would provide advice to asset managers and help them out in case they want to buy a specific financial instrument or get exposure to a specific risk. But more than all, like Goldman Sachs is a risk management culture, right? So the reason our business model works is that we are very good at managing risk, and we do it better and cheaper than like any other single firm can, or most of the firms can, either by using financial instruments or by having a very robust internal processes. So that's what Goldman Sachs is, and in terms of model risk, you can imagine that models are quite common in that type of a business, especially in global markets and market making. But this is like a kind of a firm introduction. And in terms of like what is our actual role, we could say that we are quants, right? I mean, at least in my team, and like and similar teams in Warsaw as well. So we are quants. And what is a quant exactly, right? So it's basically a specialist that applies mathematical and statistical methods to finance and risk. And this is quite a wide variety of jobs one can have. However, there are, if you do one of them well, you can often switch to another role that is fairly similar. And kind of the core thing about being a quant is, using quantitative methods, right? So using models, right? And typically complex models. So, and those models are typically used by the firm to make financial decisions or business decisions, and that's why those models are pretty essential to how the firm functions. So in terms of a quant, I mean, you can think about like a role of like quantitative person in an investment bank. There would be like multiple paths one can follow, right? And kind of the requirement here is really basic understanding of math, but like, basic, I mean, let's say advanced math or statistics, and also some exposure to programming. So I mean, it would be like profiles that we will typically become quants are related to either STEM fields, right? Like or like programming, computer science, physics. I mean, those type of profiles that we are interested in hiring. And the array of tasks that one can have is quite wide. So, I mean, I personally am in risk management, so I manage risk in terms of models in this case. But I mean, there are quite a diverse set of roles. Like one could work in portfolio management, doing the same, like using similar skills, or in software development for for models, as well as trading or data science teams, as well as doing basically research or consulting for our clients. So that's what the quant do, and kind of the core center of interest here are, at least in my case, are models, and also in majority of those roles. So let's maybe try to figure out what actually a model is. So a model is basically an engine, right? That transfer inputs into outputs. That sounds pretty simple, but on this graph there is just one arrow, inputs, right? But I mean, it can be really a complex set or network of inputs, or some other models that are feeding an input into that main model, and that kind of managing that number of like complexity of those inputs is also a challenge. So in order to transfer input into outputs, we need to know like what's our goal, right? Like every model has a purpose, right? For example, let's take a simple pricing model that is trying to price some type of a derivative transaction. I mean, for simplicity, let it be option, because everyone knows what an option is recently. So we need to basically price. And why do we need to price that option? Like, what's our purpose here? Well, we first of all, we need to know how much this asset is worth, right? So that's the first step, and for that we need a pricing model, and we typically need to price market to market, which means we need to find a price that is reflective of the current market environment. So, but that's not only the only purpose of this model. If we say options, right? I mean, typically to deal in options, you need to also risk manage them, right? To control the risk of your option portfolio, right? So this will give you a some amount of comfort around your business model, and that you will not go bankrupt next day because there is a market movement. So this model will also be used for risk management and calculating risks and things like that. So in case of the simple example, our inputs is basically all the market data that we need, like spot values, forward values, volatility surfaces, interest rates, and things like that, as well as the contractual data, right? And there's also an additional input, which is model parameters, which would be how do we interpolate the volatility surface, what type of a stochastic diffusion model we use, marked parameters that are typically, there's no real market data on, that we do need them because to use our model. So there will be like quite a lot of inputs. And as I mentioned, an output would be a price or sensitivities to market moves, as well as how much is it worth. And in this simple example, there are a lot of steps to doing it right. So first there is like a theory, right? How should we price an option, and kind of market practice as well, right? Then there is like whole set of approximations and calibrations that we would need to use in the model, and someone needs to code all of this as well, right? So it's like a quite a long kind of endeavor that and every of this step is pretty important. So I mean, I was using a very simple pricing model example, but I mean, models are relied upon in vaster, like many areas. Like, so we can, like, recently something that is very popular is related to automated trading algorithms, right? That's also quite a complex model, and it's needs to be risk managed. But also, for portfolio management, we would try to figure out what portfolio we need, right, or what portfolio we want to have, right? So we would use some optimization methods. Other things is machine learning, for example, for either for analyzing client data or for anti-money laundering or other surveillance systems. So you see that the amount of usages here is quite large, and we do have models for all of those purposes within the model. And I mean, depending how you count, I mean, the firm has like, I don't know, 3,000 to 5,000 models, and each of them does something differently. So it's really a huge number. So when we think about that simple pricing model example, there are inherent assumptions in how we price this type of an instrument. So I mean, the key, like the underlying thing, is the underlying stochastic process. So that's like kind of the assumption about what do we calculate actually, right? Then there are numerical methods. How do we price an option, right? Do we use a PD, which is quite convenient, but for not so easy to implement in case of more complex models? Or do we use a Monte Carlo simulation, which is super easy to implement but also has limitations, right? So there are like you can think about this as a garden of forking paths, right? I mean, you can always choose a different way of doing things, and that's what we actually do every day. We look at equations, we look at stochastic processes, we look at machine learning, and we try to analyze those models, understand what they do, and understand their limited assumptions basically, and their implementation as well. So in GS we typically use object-oriented programming with a database, because that's the most efficient way for pricing. But I mean, also this kind of infrastructure part is also a large challenge, and you can do different ways, go different ways. So think about this garden of forking paths, that every model is a set of choices, and there is a you can, on every fork you can go a different way. I mean, so in terms of model risk, kind of model risk stems exactly from that view of the models, that is a set of choices. And kind of using a quote from George Box, I mean, all models are wrong. That's the core of the model risk. So it's not that they are wrong, it's how practical they are, right? And when, like, the question is, when do they work actually, right? So they need to be useful, and we need to know under what exactly conditions they are useful, right? And and understand and manage that. So in case of the pricing model, we can have a complex contracts, but people need to choose a stochastic process, like what are the driving factors behind the price, as well as quite a lot of market parameters, right? So if you look at the right hand side, there are just a few simple examples of what you can what type of a model you can choose, right? So you can either choose for example a simple Brownian motion, right? to model the underlying right, or geometric random motion, right? But you can try to start incorporating stochastic volatility model, which is it will give you a completely different result, like completely like quite different result. And as well as you can probably start implementing jumps, right, and jump diffusion models as well. So there is like quite a lot of these assumptions, and in for like simplest securities, it typically like it might not matter which model like that we use a simpler model, but if when we go into a path dependent path model like exotics uh, or like barriers, I mean it starts to matter quite a lot, right? And don't even start about mortgages or like some EMBSs or derivatives of those. So this is the important portion of this is kind of incorrect or incomplete, like not practical choices can lead to huge potential, like potentially huge losses, right? So uh, if if there is a different price that is given by two different models, I mean on that particular transaction, what what is the actual the value, right? So there's always an uncertainty around that, and we need to understand which of those models works better under these conditions, and also uh, how risky using that model is in case there is like a large swing in the market or a crisis. Uh, because like that's the core thing that every 10 years we get a large large movement on the market, you know because of tensions in the economy, and that's the time when it matters, when the largest problems with models arise, right? When you see large movements in the markets, as well as large uncertainty about the future. So, but apart from like understanding assumptions of the model, there is also kind of the piece that is related to implementation, right? So, I mean, to manage model risk, you really need uh, to review implementation, because you know back in the day, like 20 years ago, like around 2000s, I mean, people that were not that aware of model risk, right? And people, for example, there wasn't really a lot of documentation written on models, and the answer was, okay, I mean, read the code, right? But I mean, reading a code is quite quite hard, and we do need to review that. But as a specialist, but as a person that is kind of a bit farther from the models, I mean, they will not have access to the code, or they will not have understanding of that code. So it's really a key thing to manage model risk, to really have a good documentation explaining what is happening in implementation, and and to have an implementation that is consistent with your documentation. And it's a simple thing, but I mean, uh, it took quite a lot of years for the major banks to actually implement that, because of how many models there are. So in terms of like implementation problems, there could be quite a few, right? For example, unstable numerical procedure, right? For example, if you have a multidimensional optimization on a non-convex function, that's a place where something can go wrong when you optimize, right? Or you can have a inception Monte Carlo paths, or you can have some biases in regressions, you can have bugs in implementation. Those all things are quite important to capture or try to mitigate it, right? And in terms of uh, usage of the models, it's also very important to limit what the usage of the particular model is, right? A particular model can be pretty useful in pricing non-path dependent derivatives, but I mean in but when you go to path dependent, it will basically useless, right? So you can, or like not a market standard. So it's up to kind of model risk to limit that usage of the model. uh, so I'm gonna walk you through quickly for a few examples that kind of are historical example of how the model kind of understanding of model risk has developed since 1990s. Just quite a few because of we don't have like quite a lot of time, but just to show you what exactly the problem there is, right? I mean, those are concrete historical examples that change the thinking of quants about model risk over time. So one of those type of examples is, in 70s and 80s, people were using Black-Scholes model, right? And assuming that there is a log normally distributed stock price. And this, was working until the very on, like, for example, this Black Monday, there was a very large move on the market, and it's kind of a 16 or 18 sigma event, which is basically impossible, right? So it shows that there is something wrong with that model, and everyone knows it. But kind of what wrong is about this model is that typically markets show fatter tails than the normal distribution. So using that, that distribution is an approximation. And also after that type of a crash, there started to be a skew in the market to increase the cost of hedging against of buying basically options to protect against such large moves. So the kind of the options protecting from losses started to be much more expensive than the ones that are protecting you from gains. I mean, another thing that is related to this is a case of long-term capital management. So this was a huge fund in 1990s, and that was using strategies that one can describe as picking pennies before the streamliner. It's so the strategy what they were using is they were buying, for example, a more liquid bond and hedging it with they were buying a less liquid bond and hedging it with a more liquid bond in this case, and and they were getting a small spread on top of that, or different trades that were exposed really to a liquidity risk, and also they were assuming that different financial assets will have high correlation between them, right? But this, at some point, this broke down, and the correlation structure has shifted quite a lot. And what they thought is a good hedge against, for example, you're hedging corporate bonds with treasuries, right? But those things stopped being so correlated as before, and that hedge was not really effective. So they found the the, the long-term capital management then was a huge crash, and there was a huge loss due to a default on Russian bonds, which was quite unexpected because it was a local currency bond. So in theory, a country can always use a printing press to print more currency. So, but Russia indeed defaulted back then, and there are a few lessons that were learned in terms of model risk. Definitely, one need to stress test the models, right? So, in terms of how will our models or our strategy behave under very stressful scenario, like you know that crash or great financial crisis or COVID period. I mean, stress tested on environments that are different than the calm markets, and that's kind of one of the key thing that people took out of this, as well as that the liquidity is a very important risk factor. So I mean, you can earn a small spread on liquidity, but then when there is a liquidity crunch, it's gonna be very possible. As well as some of the investment banks were had a low margin initial margin for short sales on for this fund because it was so huge, so large. So there was also an improvement in initial margin methodology after that event. The last one is okay. So then there is an event called related to compound whale trades, right? In credit derivatives. So in this case, was related to risk model. So risk breaches were ignored, and as well as the models modified and erroneously modified to show the risk lower by a factor of 2. So in the sense, people didn't know, like the number wasn't really correct, and this brought to people's attention like model implementation risk and code management, really, because this type of an event was also quite precarious. And also there's an example that everyone knows on great financial crisis of 2008 and 7, and this is primarily related to kind of correlation assumptions between different tranches of CDOs and different mortgages, right? So people never thought possible that all the markets, like mortgage markets in US, will decrease at the same moment, right? So correlation between those mortgages was really, assumed relatively low, as well as it was using a Gaussian copula model. Like the copula is just how you generate a correlation structure between different products when you have like a lot of them, and you need to somehow capture that correlation in high dimension. So in case of modeling, and in modeling, this was quite a risky application of that simple copula model. And we the financial crash after those events. So that's all on kind of model risk per se. I just wanted to invite people for our event that we are hosting in weeks. So basically, if you are interested in model risk, or if you are in being a quant, or if you are interested in a job in that type of environment and want to know how we actually what we actually do, we have an event, like it's an event with quantitative strategists, where we would show you a more in-depth analysis, like with codes and things like that how do you actually approach a problem from model risk perspective, as well as basically show you how you know, what is job as a quant about. So all of you are invited, and please join before 28th March, so you will have a chance to win an AirPods. And to join, just go to that link listed here. It's recruiting 360 aventure.net candidates, and find the event evening with quantitative strategists. I'll try to post on comments. So yeah, let me see whether there were any comments on the chats that we had. Okay. Okay. If I don't see any questions here, so let's wrap up, and thank you for attending the presentation, and to come and join for our event end of March to learn more.